But if separated substances understand those things which are intelligible in themselves, as has been shown, and separate substances are intelligible in themselves, for immunity from matter makes something intelligible in itself, as is clear from the above, it follows that separated substances understand separate substances, just as proper objects. Each one, then, will know both himself and others. Indeed, each of them knows itself differently than the possible intellect knows itself. For understanding is possible as a power existing in an intelligible being, but it actually becomes an intelligible species, just as primary matter actually becomes a sensible being through a natural form. But nothing is known according to what it is only in potentiality, but according to what it actually is. Whence also form is the principle of knowledge of the thing which is actually done through it. In the same way, the cognitive power becomes an act of knowing through some species. Therefore, our possible understanding does not know itself except through an intelligible species, by which it actually becomes an intelligible being. That is, by species received from phantasms, as by proper forms, but substances are separated according to their nature as actually existing an intelligible being. Hence, each one of them knows itself through its essence, not through any appearance of another thing. But since all knowledge is according to the likeness of the known and the knower, but one of the separated substances is similar to the other, according to the common nature of the genus. But they differ from each other according to the species, as appears from the foregoing. It seems to follow that one of them does not know the other as regards the proper aspect of the species, but only as regards the common aspect of the genus. Therefore, some say that one of the separate substances is the effective cause of the other. Now, in every effectual cause, there must be a likeness to its effect, and similarly, in every effect there must be a likeness to its cause, by the fact that each agent acts like itself. Thus, therefore, in the superior of separate substances, there is the similitude of the inferior, as in the cause there is the similitude of the effect. But in the inferior, there is the similitude of the superior, as in the effect the similitude of its cause. But in cases which are not unequivocal, the similitude of the effect is more prominent in the cause, but of the cause in an inferior way in the effect. But such causes must be separate superior and inferior substances, since they are not of one species constituted in different degrees. Therefore, the separate substance knows the lower and the higher according to the manner of the knowing substance, not according to the manner of a known substance, but in a lower manner. But the superior surpasses the inferior in a more eminent manner. And this is what is said in the Book of Causes, that intelligence knows what is under it and what is above it, by way of its own substance, because the cause of another is different. But since it has been shown above that separate intellectual substances are not composed of matter and form, they cannot be caused except by way of creation. But it is God's alone to create, as was shown above. Therefore, one of the separate substances cannot be the cause of the other. In addition, it has been shown that all the principal parts of the universe were directly created by God. Therefore, one of them is not different from the other. And each of the separate substances is one of the principal parts of the universe, much more so than the sun or the moon, since each of them has its own species and is more noble than any species of corporeal things. Therefore, not one of them is caused by another, but all of them are directly caused by God. Thus, therefore, according to what has been said, each of the separate substances knows God, by natural knowledge according to the mode of its substance, by which they are like God as causes. But God knows them as his own cause, having the likeness of them all in himself. But it is not in this way that one of the separate substances can know another, since one is not the cause of the other. It must therefore be considered that, since none of these substances is in its essence a sufficient source of knowledge of all other things, to each of them, above its own substance, it is necessary to add certain intelligible similitudes by which each of them can know another in its proper nature. And this may be so manifest, for the proper object of the intellect is an intelligible being, which indeed includes all possible differences and species of being, for whatever can be understood. But since all knowledge is affected by similitude, the intellect cannot fully know its object unless it has in itself the similitude of the whole being and all its differences. But such a similitude of the whole being can only be an infinite nature, which is not determined to any species or kind of being, but is the universal principle and active power of the whole being. Such is the divine nature alone, as was shown in the first. But every other nature, since it is limited to a certain kind and species of being, cannot be the universal similitude of the whole being. It is therefore left that God alone knows all things through his essence. But each separate substance knows by its own nature, with perfect knowledge, only its own species. But the intellect is not possible at all, but through an intelligible species, as was said above. But from the fact that any substance is intellectual, it is comprehensive of the whole being. Hence, when a substance separated by its nature does not actually become a whole being, considered in its substance, it is, as it were, a potential for intelligible similitudes by which the whole being is known. And those similitudes will be its act in so far as it is intellectual. Now it is not possible that these similitudes should be more, because it has already been shown that the perfect similitude of the whole universal being cannot be anything but infinite. But just as the nature of a separate substance is not infinite but limited, so the intelligible likeness existing in it cannot be infinite, but limited to some species or kind of being. Therefore, for the comprehension of the whole being, many similitudes of this kind are required. But how far any separate substance is superior, his nature is so much more like the divine nature, and for that reason it is less contracted, as approaching nearer to the perfect and good universal being, and for this reason, having a more universal participation in good and being. And therefore the intelligible similitudes existing in the higher substance are less numerous and more universal. And this is what Dionysius 12 of the celestial hierarchy says, that the superior angels have a more universal knowledge. And in the Book of Causes, it is said that of the celestial hierarchy says that the superior angels have a more universal knowledge. And in the Book of Causes, it is said that of the celestial hierarchy says that the superior angels have a more universal knowledge. And in the Book of Causes, it is said that higher intelligences have more universal forms. Now the highest of this universality is in God, who knows all things through one, that is, through his essence. But the lowest in the human intellect, which needs for every intelligible thing a species proper to the intelligible and co-equal with it. There is therefore no more imperfect knowledge of higher substances through more universal forms, as with us. For by the likeness of an animal, by which we know something in kind only, we have a more imperfect knowledge than by the likeness of man, by which we know a complete species. For to know something only according to kind is to know imperfectly, and as if in potential. But to know in kind is to know perfectly, and in fact now our understanding, because it holds the lowest level in intellectual substances, requires such particular similitudes that to each knowable proper it must respond to its proper similitude in itself. Hence, by the similitude of an animal, it does not know the rational, and consequently neither man. except in what it is. But the intelligible likeness which is in a separate substance, it is of a more universal power, sufficient to represent many things, and therefore it does not make knowledge more imperfect, but more perfect, for it is by universal virtue, in the manner of a form acting in a universal cause, which the more universal it is, the more it extends to more and produces more effectually. By similitude, therefore, both the animal and the differences of the animal know one thing, or even in a more universal and contracted manner according to the order of the aforesaid substances. Therefore, as has been said, we can take examples of this in the two extremes, namely in the divine and human understanding. For God knows all things through one thing, which is his essence. But man requires different likenesses to know different things. He also, the higher his understanding, the more he can learn from fewer things. Therefore, to those who are slow of understanding, particular examples must be brought to them in order to take knowledge of things. But when a separate substance, considered in its own nature, is capable of similitudes by which the whole being is known, it is not to be estimated that it is stripped of all such similitudes. For this is the possible disposition of the intellect before it understands, as is said in De Anima 3. Nor is it to be esteemed that it has some of them in act and others only in potential, just as primary matter in lower bodies has one form in act and others in potential, and just as our possible intellect, when we are already knowing, is actually according to certain intelligibles, but according to others it is in potentiality. For since those separate substances are not moved either by themselves or by accident, as has been shown, everything that is in them in potential must be in act. Otherwise they would proceed from potential into act, and thus be moved by themselves or by accident. Therefore there is power and action in them insofar as they are intelligible, just as in the heavenly bodies insofar as they are natural. For the matter of the celestial body is so perfected by its form that it does not remain in power to any forms. And likewise, the intellect of a separate substance is completely perfected by intelligible forms, as far as natural knowledge is concerned. Now our possible understanding is proportional to the corruptible bodies, with which it is united as a form. For thus it actually becomes having certain intelligible forms that it remains in potential for others. And for this reason it is said in the book on causes that, and in the same way the understanding of a separate substance is completely completed by means of intelligible forms as far as natural knowledge is concerned. Now our possible understanding is proportional to the corruptible bodies with which it is united as a form. For thus it actually becomes having certain intelligible forms that it remains in potential for others. And for this reason it is said in the book on causes that, and in the same way the understanding of a separate substance is completely completed by means of intelligible forms, as far as natural knowledge is concerned. Now our possible understanding is proportional to the corruptible bodies, with which it is united as a form. For thus it actually becomes having certain intelligible forms that it remains in potential for others. And for this reason it is said in the book on causes that intelligence is full of forms, because of course the whole potentiality of its intellect is complete through intelligible forms. And thus by such intelligible species one separate substance can understand another. But perhaps it may appear to some that, since a separate substance is intelligible by its essence, it is not necessary to posit that by some intelligible species one is understood from another, but by the essence of the understood substance itself. For this fact, that a substance is known through an intelligible species, seems to happen to material substances from the fact that they are not actually intelligible through their essence, whence it is necessary that they be understood through abstract intentions. This also seems to be in harmony with the saying of the philosopher who said in Metaphysics 11 that in substances separated from matter, the intellect does not differ to understand and that which is understood. But if this is granted, there are not a few doubts. First of all, because the intellect in act is the intellect in act, according to the teaching of Aristotle. Now it is difficult to see how one substance can be separate from the other while it understands itself. Still, everything that acts or operates works through its form, to which the operation corresponds, like the heating of heat, whence we also see that whose form the sight is informed by. Now it does not seem possible that one separate substance should be the form of another, since each has a separate being from the other. It seems impossible, therefore, that one should be seen by the other through its essence. Further, the intellect is the perfection of the intelligent, but the inferior substance cannot be the perfection of the superior. It would therefore follow that the superior would not understand the inferior, if each were understood by its essence, and not by another species. Again, it is intelligible within the understanding as far as what is understood. But no substance can be drawn to the mind except God alone, who is in all things by essence, presence, and power. It seems therefore impossible that a separate substance should be understood by its essence from another, and not by its likeness in itself. And this indeed must be true according to the opinion of Aristotle, who states that understanding occurs through the fact that the intellect in act is one with the intellect in act. Hence a separate substance, although it is actually intelligible in itself, is nevertheless not understood according to itself except by the understanding to which it is one. Thus a separate substance understands itself through its essence, and according to this, the understanding is the same, and understanding, and understanding. But according to Plato's position, understanding takes place through the contact of the intellect with an intelligible object. Thus then, one separate substance can understand another through its essence, while it happens to it spiritually, but the inferior is the superior, as if taking it as the perfection of himself. Whence also Dionysius says, chapter 4 of De Divinis Nominibus,